we should love each other as you have loved us. We ask you today to guide our thoughts, guide the direction in which we take this meeting. And we ask that all that we do be done to your honor and your glory. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you very much, colleague. First of all, let me formally welcome all the members to this meeting, and I trust that you had a very restful, peaceful, and fulfilling holiday season, both you and your respective families. And I also want to extend best wishes to you all for the new year, 2017. And this I also want to extend to the parliamentary staff and members of the media, all. I think this is the first in a while we're going to hopefully have a full 1 year run of this committee, having just resumed in the latter part of last year. So I know it will be very demanding on everyone's time. Any apologies from member Lisa Anna? And I know member Bunting has a standing objection to the intransigence of the scheduling of committee meetings, and he would not be present. I am taking note of that. That said, any other apologies? Okay.
Strictly, Chairman, I to member Bunting's approach ought not to be noted. What you've asked for is apologies.
Yes.
And I do not get the sense that what member Bunting has communicated via the chairman is an apology.
Is on it?
It's not an apology.
Okay. No, I just make a passing observation. That's a passing observation.
Very well, sir. And I noted that it's been recorded in the past, but it's quite inappropriate.
Okay. That's for clarification, just a passing observation. Members, you're all aware of some email correspondence between the committee and ourselves, regarding the schedule of this meeting. Just to restate, when we had the last meeting, having had the report from the second appearance of the public defender, we all felt that it would not be fair not to have the security forces make their own responses to those claims or what was set out in the report regarding the detainees. And in doing so, we set the date for the meeting to allow for the information required by the public defender on the remaining two states of emergency. As you recall, the information provided was just for St. James. And we said sometimes allowing for the report to get to her, for her to do the analysis of the data, and to come back after with the security forces that we could deal with them in total. That was the basis on which today's meeting was scheduled. I saw an email in the latter part of last month indicating that the report would not be made available in the projected time for what we set out to do to be accomplished. And hence, I made a request for the meeting to be rescheduled to allow more time for the information to go to the public defender and for her to do the analysis that she indicated she would require in order to make a meaningful or more meaningful submission to the committee. I must tell you, I was a bit disappointed, right, that the members, which essentially on the government side, refused to facilitate that rescheduling for that to happen. And in so doing, we are meeting today without the data and the analysis being done for St. Catherine, and therefore have no empirical data on those areas and the analysis from the public defender, which would then necessitate convening another meeting, right, in order to give completeness to the exercise as it relates to St. Catherine and the corporate area states of emergency. I frankly believe it is not the best use of the public servants' time, namely the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Staff and his colleagues from the JDF, and also the Public Defender's Office having to make another trip here. So I really just want to posit my own displeasure, as I indicated a moment ago. But it's the majority opinion of the members, and so we have no choice but to adhere to it, regrettably. Member Clark,
may I just make a...
You want to, Member Clark was before, you want to yield?
Right.
And then...
Mr. Chairman, it is very sad to hear the way you put the argument before the committee. Because, Mr. Chairman, the meeting was called to get a response from the Chief of Staff and the Commissioner of Police. It was never designed to have a counter or a rebuttal from the public defender. I was only made aware through the same email that was passed on to us that the public defender was saying that she is unable to make any comment on the matter, but she would be definitely be present at this meeting. So, Mr. Chairman, for you to be saying that the government side voted to have the meeting anyway is a little bit disingenuous.
No, Mr. Campbell.
Mr. Campbell has spoken.
No, and...
Mr. Daly, it's 2009. I will not be bullied. I'm sorry, colleague. That was an aside.
I'm not going to get into those matters between you both.
Chairman, I sincerely hope we take this in the sense that it is intended. I take my colleague's point, Member Clark, in that upon receipt of the email from the clerk, I had the occasion to revisit the notes, and it indicated that the two parties who were invited were invited to respond to that information which was contained in the report which was tabled before the House. And so that we find ourselves in a position where the two invitees already having expressed them, their consent and readiness to appear before the committee to respond to information which is already before us. And to say that the public defender has been deprived of an opportunity to analyze later information is not really so, because what it would require, if we so desire, a further date, whatever happens, a further date for the police commissioner and the JDF to come back. I do not believe that any useful purpose will be served by a continuing analysis. We have taken a position, this House has taken a position, that the SOE and all that has gone by the way. So what we'll be pursuing is action which is unlikely to bring any results, because we don't act in vain. This is not what the committee is about. I mean, I believe enough information is before us for us to file a report, but what is that report going to achieve? Absolutely, as the British say, sweet FA. There's nothing useful which should be achieved. And I don't believe that's what we're about. We're not about wasting time. Yes, let those two parties who are invited come and respond to information which is before us. The House has taken a decision that it doesn't want the public state of emergency. So whatever the public defender was going to present to us relates to that specific time and place. And those are no longer, they are gone. So we'll be pursuing an action in futility, and I don't think that's what we're about.
Madali?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Let me also use this opportunity to welcome back our friends and colleagues and to wish you all a Happy New Year. Hope you had a very good Christmas, and to the members of the media who's always here, and staff, supporters, and staff support, and members of the Parliament. I'm happy that we are all alive to be back in the Parliament and to be back in the committee. Chairman, let me just say this. I saw the email from the Secretary of the committee, or the consultant to the committee, requesting that the meeting be rescheduled for another date. A simple thing, you know. The facts are the facts. The government members say no, and the other members say yes, let's reschedule. So the fact is, the chairman is not saying anything that is not factual. The 6 government members say no rescheduling of the meeting, regardless of what it is we were hoping to gain. And the opposition said, request that it be rescheduled. That it is. That is what it is. Chairman, let us use the time. Let us do as much as we can do, and don't bother to get back into all of that, because the facts remain. The 6 members of the governing side say do not reschedule the meeting, and the 5 members of the opposition says we ask that it be rescheduled. The majority rules, and we are here today, so let's just use the time. The staff members are outside, the police and public defender and the JDF and others. Let us use the time effectively.
Sure.
Member Green, I see you are intimating
Yes.
forward, and then Member Clark.
Let me start, Chair, by wishing all my colleagues and yourself, and especially the hardworking committee clerk, Ms. Brandon, all the best for the new year. Of course, those who take our notes as well, and members of the media, I wish you all peace and prosperity for 2019. You know, I find myself towards the end of his presentation agreeing partially with what Member Daly has said, but unfortunately, because the chair raised the matter and has positioned it in a certain manner, then I think we are forced to respond, because there are things that are being said both here and in other spaces that give a false impression. And the impression that is being given is that the government members have called upon the commissioner and the chief of defense staff to come and to respond to information that is not before us, which is not the case. The reality is that a report was laid in the House by the public defender. The public defender came and presented on multiple occasions, and the committee agreed that, having heard the public defender's presentation, having had the report, that we would call upon the Ministry of National Security, the JCF, and the JDF to respond to the report. Subsequent to that, we would have gotten a written response from the entities that we asked. They would have confirmed that they're available for today, as was indicated by our committee clerk. And I think it's against that backdrop that, despite the chairman indicating his feeling that maybe we should delay, that the government members felt that the report having come in, the response having come in, the civil servants having indicated an availability for today, that it was important for us to come and to do the business of the committee today. The reality is that the data that may come from the public defender may not occasion us having to call back the civil servants. And we can speak to whether there will be a need. So in that light, the government members agreed that the matter is so important, especially in light of the multiplicity of discussions regarding the SOE, that it was important for us to have this discussion today. So I agree that we should press forward, and hopefully we will have fruitful discussions, Chairman.
Member Clark.
Mr. Chairman, while I agree that we need to push forward in achieving more for this year, I also want to state it clearly, because I hear my colleague Dali keep repeating the government members voted not to or to. But here is the email that was sent to us by Ms. Brandon 6 days ago. Please note that the Internal and External Affairs Committee will meet on Tuesday, January 8, 2019 at 10 a.m. Representative of the Ministry of National Security, the JCF and the JDF have been invited to this meeting to respond to the Office of the Public Defender's report. The JCF response to the report is attached. Kindly note that the Public Defender has indicated that the statistical data to the committee in respect of the additional information provided to her office by the Commissioner of Police, that means she's in receipt of something, on the zone of special operation and state of emergency for St. Catherine North and sections of Kingston and St. Andrew will not be available by Friday, January 4, 2019. She, however, assured that she will be attending the meeting on January 8. Mr. Chairman, I want it to be noted, it is not the government member, it is the committee. And I noticed that on many occasions it is single-outed, the government member, as if it is the government members only that makes a decision here. We are here from both sides, and when the decision is taken, let us accept it for what it is, because it is majority that rules, that carries. And either way, we comply. So I hope going forward in 2019, we will try not to let it be seen as if the government members are against certain aspect of the work. So thank you.
Members, I fully concur with the comment that we should go forward. Suffice it to say, about all that was said by both you, Member Clark, and Member Campbell, I just refer you to the minutes of the last meeting, and I rest my case there. The facts, the page 9 of the minutes of the last meeting of November 27th. The facts are here, and it speaks for itself. I don't want to spend any more time go over it. But I think I will only rely on the facts to support my position.
Yes, and
I lay my case there, Member Green, and I'm heeding to your recommendation. Let us proceed.
You know, the last thing I said, Chair, I won't go into the minutes.
But you're
Chair,
going nonetheless.
I had wanted to say that my hope for the committee this as we start a new year is that a spirit of bipartisanship will really reign supreme. You know, I get the impression, Chair, and it is unfortunate, and Member Clark said it, we come here as a committee really as members of Parliament, not members of government and opposition. We're members of the committee as members of Parliament. So the committee is constituted of the member from Central St. James and so on and so forth. I do find in a lot of our back and forth, in a lot of our interaction with the persons who come here, that on both sides of the fence, we at times allow it to become more political banter than a focused, precise look at the national perspective. And you know what I would have hoped, and it's far gone. So for example, I would have hoped that the decision having been made, that we would have just started by inviting the persons in and let us get, because the committee has decided, you know, and my hope for this year is that whatever decision, whatever banter, that we look at the national interest. And also, Chair, I'm going to make a special appeal to you. There are times that comments are made that motive is ascribed to different members, oftentimes political motive. I want you to guard against that. You know, the member who I think offends the most is not in the House. So I will wait until he returns to the House to again make the point. But I'm asking you, Chair, where you see any of us on either side ascribing political motive to any assertion that is made, that you guard against it.
Thank you, Member Green. I endeavor to do my best, and I crave your support in that effort. Member Green and Member Witter were not here when I was making my opening remarks. I want you to be aware that I did extend my wishes to you two, even in your absence, both of you. Members, we have a little challenge here this morning. There is a report from the security forces which have been circulated, and they have requested not for it not to be disseminated. The challenge I'm having from where I am, and I invite your suggestion, is if the information ought not to be disseminated, if we discuss it in the open, we are effectively disseminating at least significant contents of it rather than just referring to it. I'm not so certain in my own mind, right, how we should deal with that. Quite frankly, I became aware of it this morning myself. Our modus operandi is not to disseminate any sensitive security information to the public, and we have to honor that. So we have two choices. I don't know, I certainly did not get to, it was circulated during the holidays by email, Ms. Brandon, and I had not gotten a chance myself to go through it, and I suspect.
Has any attempt been made to redact the section?
No, no reduction was done at all, right? So, no, I want to throw it, and I'm going to invite your comments.
What I was going to suggest, Chair, as you did the last time, what I'm aware, we don't distribute what is shared with us.
Right.
What you did the last time I found useful, where you indicated to the members of the JCF and the JDF that any matter that they don't want to discuss,
They so indicate.
yes, and then if we so desire, we could
can
have
break
an
for in-camera discussion on it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in that spirit, then what we will do, we will ask them to comment on those things which they feel comfortable to say publicly, and we discuss around those. The truth is, I have not gotten a chance really to go through the document, if I'm honest. And if having gone through it subsequent to this morning, then we probably can arrange for in-camera discussion with them on those items subsequent to.
But Chairman, if the invitation is to be confined to the information which the
Yeah.
public defender. I suppose we can go through that
Could-
without
yes,
offending.
Yes. So we will give them the opportunity to comment on anything in here that they feel comfortable to speak to in the open, and we'll just give them, well, the more substantive part of the discussion is regarding the public defender's report, which was the basis on which we had primarily invited them in. So that would be that is how we will proceed for this morning. So we're all on board? Orderly, could you invite? Good morning and welcome to Madam Permanent Secretary. I want to think of you as a full-fledged member of this Parliament. Members of the ministry and your associate entities led by our Commissioner of Police and his team, and Colonel Williams, who is now leading the JDF here this morning. So one day back cry is back cry, so you are in charge, at least here. Welcome to you, Colonel, and your team. Madam Public Defender, welcome once again to the House, to you and your team members. First of all, let me wish you all the very best for the new year, 2019, a year that we look forward to less murders, less shootings, less serious crimes all around, and a more peaceful Jamaica going forward. The purpose of this morning's meeting, coming out of the last meeting we had as a committee on November 27th, when on that occasion we had a further submission from the public defender regarding the detention of persons during the state of emergency, because the data and the information, as I recall, related primarily to the St. James state of emergency. We had subsequent to the St. James state of emergency, we had two others in North St. Catherine Police Division and in selective areas in Kingston and St. Andrew. The committee felt that since we were reviewing the effectiveness operations of the state of emergency, for completeness, we should also consider the other two states of emergency. And as I said, the data for the other two, was not available then. We had set the meeting date of today based on some projections of that would allow for the public defender to get the similar set of data on St. Catherine North and the corporate area, as was the case for St. James, do the analysis, make a report, and then we could deal with it all together rather than on separate occasions. Communication reaching us near the latter part of during December indicated that that set of work by the public defender would not be in keeping with the projected timeline, and hence there was an effort to reschedule this morning's meeting. That said, Madam Pierce and Colonel Williams and Commissioner, we felt as a committee that it would only be fair to allow the security forces to respond to the committee to some of the matters regarding the detainees, since you both, the JDF and the JCF, is the one responsible for making such detentions and all else that prevails during the course of the detention. So it was on that basis that you were invited back. I take it that you both, well, you all have seen the report, all right, and I've gone through it, and I am proposing that in the first instance I would ask the PS, as is normal, to make any opening remarks and to generally, and then to have the security leaders, chiefs, make their own presentation. We felt that the public defender presence would be better. They would have a to and fro, and we hear from you, then go back to them. We'll allow for the public defender to make any observation that she wishes to make. With that said, colleagues, I'm proposing that we proceed in that manner, if we all concur. Okay. Madam P.S.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and members. Good morning again. Let me just conclude the introductions, the full introduction of the team. Major General Anderson, Commissioner of Police, and Colonel Roderick Williams, who's acting Chief of Defense. There's also Colonel Mahatma Williams, Major Michael Deans as part of the legal team, Ms. Paula Wadsworth, Mr. SSP Desmond Brooks from the JCF, and ACP Elan Powell. That is a full team. Okay. So just for my opening comments, which I would put forward, we have been called here to respond to the submission made by the public defender in relation to the state of public emergency. And it appears throughout the submission that the public defender has made some major thematic issues concerning arbitrariness, discriminatory operational procedures, and inhumane treatment. We admit that there were some challenges in the onset, in particular challenges in relation to some logistical issues. However, we wish to provide some context and clarity. Mr. Chairman, we have learned many lessons since the beginning of the state of public emergency, and we note the recommendations of the public defender. Notwithstanding, the ministry has taken and continues to take steps in relation to improvements of police stations island-wide. A rationalization of police infrastructure was done in 2016 with a view to assess the current needs and to facilitate improvement of police stations. In relation to the Freeport Police Station, which is the main detention facility for the SOE in St. James, a total of $4.95 million has been spent to effect repairs and improvements since the public defender's submission. Improvements included plumbing repairs and reconfiguration of the sewage system. Phase 2 of the project will include improvement of ventilation, further plumbing repairs, and improvement in aesthetics. In recognition of the need for improvement in the quality of the diet served to persons in custody, The JCF nutritionists reviewed the dietary needs, and a proposal has been put forward to the Ministry of Finance for an increase in the daily allowance to $500 per person. Mr. Chairman, this would follow on from an increase in 2017 from $200 to $300. But in the interim, and in order to accelerate the effort within this financial year, we are now engaging the suppliers to determine their capacity to improve quality and variety. Mr. Chairman, in accordance with the Emergency Powers Regulations, an Emergency Power Review Tribunal was appointed in all 3 states of public emergency. The Ministry has provided administrative support to the tribunals. A number of hearings were conducted in the St. James Emergency Power Review Tribunal. The tribunal has so far reviewed 22 of the 24 detention orders signed by the Honorable Minister. Recommendations were made in relation to 18 of the reviews, of which there were 8 recommendations for revocation of detention orders and 10 recommendations for the detention to continue. Mr. Chairman, while we acknowledge that the SOE may have caused some amount of discomfort, it has certainly served to restore public order and public safety and has facilitated improved citizens' relations. Mr. Chairman, I have personally visited communities affected. I recall a visit to Montego Hills where the ministry co-hosted a jamboree bringing together neighboring communities at the Montego Hills police station. Whilst there, a resident expressed that for 20 years they had not seen that form of community engagement, and that is significant. So, Mr. Chair, let me interject here and state that community engagements such as these provide the space to continue the dialogue in strengthening the public safety policy machinery process. I will now hand over to the Commissioner, who will provide further context and clarity in relation to the operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam PS. Commissioner.
Chair and members of the committee, good morning. I'd like to first thank you for allowing us this opportunity to respond to the report. I think my response is, well, we've submitted a written response, but I think my response is...
Commissioner, just a second. I omitted to convey and advise. We were advised, you have submitted a written report. Yes, and we were advised that you do not wish for it to be disseminated, as is the practice of this committee and other committees of the House dealing with security matters. We reserve dissemination of any information that is deemed sensitive by the security forces. That said, since the document is not to be disseminated and to remain in the confines of the members only, we agree that we will give you the latitude to only discuss those things in here that you feel comfortable with, and we would restrict our question in our discussion only to those things in the open committee. If there is anything else in here, then we will arrange for an in-camera discussion of those. So in other words, you are not obliged, and you will not be asked to divulge anything that you deem sensitive for security reasons. And also that applies to the JDF.
Thank you, Chair, for that clarification. I think when we were asked if we would like to distribute it or not, which was just a while ago outside, I haven't really got a chance to look through it from that perspective. So perhaps when we've gone through it, we may change that position.
Most of the members, including yours, surely have not gotten a chance to go through it.
Right.
Either, so don't feel uncomfortable.
All right. Okay. All right. So I think certainly my approach to the public defender's report is really to provide context and clarify things as necessary. And quite often when a report is made, how it gathers legs outside of the House creates all sorts of impressions, some of which the public defender probably never even intended to create. And so I think what's important, this matter of, and you spoke to it in your opening remarks, Chair, this matter of the death of our citizens and the levels of violent crime that we're experiencing. The public defender and I have to work closely on these matters. I went down to Montego Bay myself when the state of emergency was called not long after, and I saw the public defender there working tirelessly to get things better. And I think that the organization, the police force, was responsive to what she said, and a number of changes were made. A family liaison person was appointed who has worked since with the public defender on those matters. After coming across to the police force as commissioner, I had one of the early meetings I had was with the public defender, where we went through a number of the issues contained in the report to seek solutions and provide clarification to those. So today I think it's important that it's understood widely that the activities that took place under the state of emergency have a context. And the context isn't one of arbitrariness. It is one that has been informed by an intelligence analysis, hotspot analysis, where we look at the concentrations of violence over time, the crime band, looking at the times that these take place, what we call a discourse analysis, which is really the modus operandi of gangsters and the people who have been terrorizing these communities. The truth of the matter is that as the police or military enter communities, the people who are involved blend in with the rest of the citizenry, and largely what we have seen is that people kill very close to where they live. Down the road, rival roads, parallel streets, that sort of thing. That's what we had seen. That's what the intelligence is saying, and that's what their MOs are. We also had to include in that who are the likely victims of these violence, and who are the likely perpetrators. And both victims and perpetrators fall within a particular demographic, largely of young males between the age of 18 and 24. The public defender, I think, rightly pointed out that there are specific communities where most of the people were detained from. And those communities are the very same communities where the violence had been occurring over time. Flankers, Norwood, Glendevon, Granville, they're known. So it's not surprising that that is where that would happen. The actual numbers are, and they're in line with what the public defender said, we detained on average 13 people a day. 13 in all operations. We did hundreds of operations daily, but we detained on average 13 persons a day. No, and we're talking about St. James, because largely this report was St. James. Our highest day was the first day, which was 86. Now, all of this has to be looked at in the backdrop of what was happening. So we had 335 murders in 2017, and the beginning of 2018 was trending higher than that. And it's in that context that, having declared a state of emergency, operations were initially conducted in the 9 areas where the killings had been highest over a protracted period of time. On that day, we detained 86 people, which is really 9 persons per community, 9 persons per high violence community. I think when you look at the figures that way, it doesn't seem the same way as if you take it cumulatively. And she did not say this, but the impression could be drawn that we had thousands of people in detention for a protracted period of time. That was not the case. The 22% of persons were released the same day. Another 41% were released the following day, and by 2 days' time, 75% of people were out. And so, in the end of this, and I think it's important to note that operations that are not driven by information, intelligence, and knowledge cannot give you a 70% decline in murders. They have to be targeted and informed to get that sort of a reduction. And so I think there's a number of things within the reports. I don't know how you want to proceed, Chair, but I can stop here and perhaps allow the defense force, I don't know, or take questions as required, whatever, Chair.
Anybody want to, so far, you want to just take them as we go along? Yeah, anybody want to make any?
Well, I was wondering if we were going to, if there were any opening remarks from the JDF first, before.
Well,
since we're doing.
We could just complete the commission and then take the JCF and then we open it up after.
Thank you very much, PS and Commissioner. 3 questions. PS, you informed the committee about some of the things you have done, the ministry, in order to address some of the conditions pointed out by both your own people and the report from the public defender, how much you spent on the stations and so on and so forth, which we are very happy for. I just want to ask 2 questions. What has happened to the creation of the additional police division in St. James? It was announced some time ago. And the construction of this barracks to host large numbers of forces down there. Is it still on track? And that's for you. And a comment from, because it's very important, because this is, when the state of emergency ends, the police and the security forces have to protect the people and will have to protect the people. And that is why I wrote down operations that are not driven by intelligence and knowledge cannot bring the results. I'm going to leave that for in camera because I have a concern about that comment from the commissioner. Because it gives the impression that there was no intelligence before. No, I'm just saying it gives the impression that the only way you can arrest these people and detain people and detain 9 per community, etc., 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 is driven by intelligence and knowledge. And I'm saying you have intelligence in the force all along. No, you may reply. I just want you to clarify it, what you meant. Yes.
I was speaking in the context that there is a certain narrative that suggests arbitrariness in what we did. And so it's in that context that I was establishing that it wasn't. It was actually driven by information. So that was the basis.
I must say, I was a bit struck by that to Commissioner, that when you said that as a result of the more targeted approach, because I would presume that all police operation, or police operation in general, right, are driven, especially in high crime area like Montego Bay, where it has been a problem for a while.
Yes, exactly. But what I'm saying is, so over time, as you're aware, that we have picked up a number of persons who we know have been involved. It becomes more complicated when you're trying to get evidence to actually carry them to court. It's not the same, but they are picked up, but largely they're released in 24 hours. And 48 hours and they're back in the community. The problem with that is that the community knows them and knows that they'll be back today or tomorrow. And there's a fair amount of fear and terror within the communities.
Just one passing data though, you had mentioned, I remember 2 days you said was about 22%, but those detained for 2 days was about 22% of the...
No, Chair, I say that who were released the same day was about 22% released the same day. Right, yeah, yes, Chair. Yeah.
Well, no, you're going to respond to me.
Yes. I'm going to ask the Commissioner to speak to the creation of the additional division, because it's a strictly operational issue. But in terms of the additional barracks in the West, yes, we have acquired the Mount Pelier lands, and we're working through now with the JCF and the JDF as to how much acreage each will take. And in the 1920 budget, or hopefully our capital investments will allow for some phasing of work. But Colonel Williams can speak to the barracks on the construction on the western base. Right. He can speak more, elaborate more on that. So the build out for the west is taking place.
Member Daddy, so I'll speak to both from the police perspective. Mobile Reserve West is still being established. We're looking at Montego Hills, right beside Montego Hills Police Station. That area, it's cleared now. It actually dominates most of the communities where there are problems. It drops it. Police presence in the middle of where the problems are, and I think that police presence always needs to be located in the middle of the problem. The other question was, oh, right, the divisional separation. We haven't had a discussion on that since I've been commissioner. But it's something I remember when that came up. It's something that we can relook at, member. Yes.
I saw an expression, Member Green, that you wanted to intervene.
I was going to wait until after, but let me ask the question. I guess the Commissioner can determine whether it's something to answer here on camera. Sometimes, Commissioner, the impression is given that I think it is largely acknowledged that the state of a public emergency in St. James has led to results. The impression is given that the only reason is because of an influx of boots on the ground. I wonder if, without going into the actual operations, it's a hard question to ask. Maybe I should ask it in camera, but I do wonder, what are the things that you ascribe to the 70% reduction in murders in relation to the state of emergency? Is it just that we've been able to put more boots on the ground? Is it as basic as that? I genuinely wonder.
Yes, I think.
Though that has been debated publicly a lot.
And that
Yeah.
That is the problem, Chair, and it's the basic. And I know, you can't go into why it's working because then you don't want to undermine why it works. But it's put out so often that all it is just more people, and and that's why people sometimes wonder if all it is more people, then why do you need it? Because why not just put the more people and leave them there? And let me ask the question another way. Let me ask the question. No, let me ask the question another way. No, let me leave it.
No, it is, nobody's asking, and I've given both the Commissioner and Acting Chief of Defense Staff the cover that any sensitive information regarding your operations, you are not obliged to mention them here. But I think it is a concern or set of perspective out there as to the approach, right? More boots on the ground, police saturation, and the difference it makes. For example, intelligence gathering, that's where the sensitive part, and nobody was asking you to tell us what kind of intelligence you get. But we can talk about whether intelligence are good, bad, sufficient, insufficient, without compromising them at all.
Let me say what I can. No, it's not just boots on the ground. We've done that. We've increased numbers previously, and that alone, of course, won't do it. There's a key part, because remember, what we are doing is reducing murders, and to do that, you have to reduce the opportunity to do so. You have to create separation between those people who are killing and those people who are killed. What we've found over time is that because we've been running the operation in Montego Bay and increasing numbers since about 2015-16 because the numbers were going up. And what we found was that we had to put police and soldiers in static positions, because if you were roving any at all and you move, the guys would cross and go and do a killing. I mean, it's as close as that. Separation of persons from the community also allows persons who are always in fear to give information, etc., to consider giving information. And obviously the other thing is, and the defense force can speak to that. Perhaps I'll leave it for them to speak to it. Not that I don't know what to say, but I think somebody else is doing the post. And really,
I might say that they support you in the state of emergency.
That's exactly
not the other way around.
So they always support law enforcement outside of war, but they have certain flexibility that comes with that they don't enjoy otherwise. And we have worked together over time, many years. I mean, my whole career we've worked jointly with the police, but the two organizations run on different rhythms. Necessarily. Soldiers are designed to deploy into areas, they'll stay there for weeks and move from a forward base, etc. Policing largely is about doing your shift at work and then going on and becoming a police officer in your community. So it's a different rhythm, and so there are challenges sometimes with having a police officer with every JDF movement, which is required outside of a state of emergency.
But Commissioner, on that note though, isn't it the case that in special police operations, police go outside of the shift arrangement?
Yeah,
I've been aware that in the past.
absolutely.
Yes. So the shift, the ship restriction does not affect.
So, Chair, I'm just showing how the organizations that have meant matters outside of that legislation. These are some of the challenges that we're working through. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Member Witter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, in your request for the extension of the public state of emergency, at this point, did you really feel that you were getting closer to what was your desired outcome in your first request for the emergency powers? Yes, to what was your desired outcome in the beginning when you asked for the emergency powers?
Well, yes, because the figures in the first instance, the measure is really to save lives. I mean, it's all that's really what it's about. And of course, because that is happening, we're moving closer to it. Yes.
You're moving closer to what was the desired outcome at the beginning of the...
Well, the desired outcome is to get your murder rate, the number of your citizens killed, to the point where your normal systems you can go through a normal process of law enforcement and justice system and correctional processes, hopefully rehabilitative ones that you can manage. Once you're outside of that, you constantly start to accumulate this additional amount.
Right, so yeah, that's the question I was asking, right. Whether or not you feel like you were getting to that point.
We are on our way there, okay. But we're not there.
Yes.
Okay.
Member Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the Commissioner of Police, I'll be more specific. As a son of the soil, St. James, I want you to give me a comparison of, the month where we are now, 8 days, 2018, 2019, how many murders are recorded since the start of the year, and to give me a comparative analysis of both time period
for St. James alone?
For St. James.
Okay, right. We'll get somebody if you just give me a second, we'll just pull up those figures. So in the interim, if there's anything else, I'll be happy to answer.
And that is after the 1 year state of emergency you're talking.
Sorry, I want a comparative analysis of the time period. 8 days into January 2018 as against 8 days into 2019.
Much lower. Yeah.
Sorry?
Much lower.
No, I don't want it from you, Mr. Chairman. I want it from
It is published. It is published.
Good question, Leroy. Don't be distracted.
Mr. Chairman, I would hope when we start this morning, they ask that you be a protective barrier.
You want protection from Member Daly?
Yes, sir. Yes, what I'm talking about.
I think it's because we're only a few days into the year. I think it's 1 versus 3, so it's something like that at this point. So 3 last year, 1 we've had 1 this year. I think probably the probably a more telling figure is that we're from 180 plus per 100,000 down to 55 per 100,000 now over the 2 year on year.
Mr. Chairman, I ask a question because the follow-up to it is that you're actually getting the result that you had envisioned, wherein saving lives is the order of the day.
Yes, we are getting results. Yes, yes.
Mr. Chairman, that's what I wanted to be brought out in the.
Yes, yes. And we won't go into how many gang members and so have been detained, arrested, and guns found, and we won't go into that now. But Commissioner, I allow you to complete, and I want to keep focus on the particular report from the public defender, which is primarily the basis on which we are gathered this morning.
Mr. Chair, I don't know if you want me to go through how you want me to take. Okay.
Bear in mind, as I said at the very outset, this sitting is to give you an opportunity to respond. If you are complete, fine, and I'll go to the chief of acting chief of defense staff.
Well, I think it's and thank you, Chair. So the first thing I just spoke about was really to, I think, provide context just widely, but also with the public defender here, and I'm happy that she's here, that some of the things that you'll see actually that they are not in any way arbitrary. I think that's the point. That was a key point.
I had a couple of questions arising from what you indicated and the permanent secretary.
Okay.
One of the difficulties, I hear you, Commissioner, about the number of persons detained on a daily basis and the duration of the detention. From the public defender's report, there was an average of 4.4 days each defender. And of course, average does not mean it's everybody. Some spend 1 day, in my own inquiry, and been to St. James, person there up to 9 months, right? So it varies, but the average is the average. That's one. What was of concern to many committee members, including myself, is the fact that all of these detainees are deemed innocent unless they are established to be involved in some criminal activity. And one, to be denied of the freedom is one. Two, is the condition under which those persons, which are predominantly, overwhelmingly innocent of any criminal activity by virtue of the number of persons that were charged. From the 3,600 3,000, you know the numbers, exact number that it was. There was 139 persons who were charged in St. James. And of that 139, you had about, which is about on a 4% of the overall total, less than 2% was for charges accepting, like for indecent language and possession of ganja, dealing in ganja, breach of Immigration Act, obstructing police, overstaying in the country, and those kinds of things. It was only less than 2%. So 98% of those 3,600 would have not been involved or have any evidence for them to be charged. Now, the concern that I shared and many others, I think the public at large, hence the alarm that you referred to in the public defender's report, is not being deemed involved in any criminal activity or any nefarious activity by virtue of intelligence to have led to them. And we have reports of persons, guys on a football field playing, all of them thrown in the truck and carted off for processing. And when they get there, the conditions that prevail, and I emphasize the condition being that prevail, because this was not a spontaneous operation, the state of emergency. I remember the Prime Minister standing here to say the reason why it was just occurring is because they need to properly plan for it. So when you plan for something, you make provision for what you anticipate to happen, such as, one, where are you going to detain them when where you're going to place them when you detain them, what the condition that will prevail in those detention areas. There was time to prepare, and many of them were reported to be sleeping on concrete slabs, right, for the duration, whether it is 1 night, 2 nights, right. That is what was planned for, because it wasn't a spontaneous activity. It was planned for. So they, like everybody else, will say that the security forces, your security forces, Commissioner, planned to subject them to that condition. You planned it, that they are going to be sleeping on those concrete slabs. You also planned that they are going to be fed with $300 of meal that the peer spoke about for the breakfast, the meal. It was planned because you knew before what will obtain. As against what normally obtains in the police station from the failings over the years that have not been adequately attended. But this was a planned operation, premeditated, planned, executed. That is what came out in the report.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, so our security forces, ours, yes, Chair, ours, I might not so much mine, sir. But so the $300 a day issue, let me just deal with that one at first. That is what it has been the standard. That's what is allocated, not just for detainees, but across our lockups, etc. Now that is being revised. I mean, I raised it immediately as soon as it came to attention. As I said, the public defender and I have discussed this from as early as April, and I know the permanent secretary has moved to increase that amount to 500. We got our own nutritionist to look at it, look at what the diet should be, how they can get I think it's 2,000 calories per day, and what that would cost. And so that is how we tried to remedy that matter. In terms of...
Has it been in effect as yet? The increase?
Is it? Yeah,
we are negotiating now with the suppliers to make that increase, but I'm still haven't got. This is a negotiation with Ministry of Finance, and it has been ongoing from 2010. So, and we have been through this JCF trying to make these changes. So, currently, I've given the go-ahead, and so the discussions are taking place with the suppliers to how we're going to increase the meal.
No, my simple question, PS, I want to be clear.
No, they have not yet started getting that.
Because you have a normal problem before that was prevailing year and year. This state of emergency is a one-off situation, right? Because it's not a permanent arrangement. It's a one-off, temporary. So I would presume that you'll make some one-off temporary arrangements.
Well, you and I know it's not so easy to do those kinds of things. You have to get the Ministry of Finance to approve, because this particular figure is what the Ministry of Finance approves right across the board for prisoner diets, as well as the DCS as well.
I have a different, but I won't pursue it. Yeah. But I know, being in the Ministry of Finance myself and others, what is doable.
But this, regardless of that, I've said go ahead. Yeah.
Commissioner.
Right, Mr. Chair. So, on the. I
don't want Commissioner have to protect you, because I know I don't have any HR managers here for certain persons, but I have to protect.
Thank you, sir.
Chair, remember what we spoke about before.
Yes,
remember.
Yes.
So I think in some of the what you said is out there. If I may just comment on that briefly. As I say, what the detention allowed for is to separate persons who are likely to do violence from the communities. Now, to the extent that somebody will identify one of these people, and because of that identification, the person is picked up, that person will never give you a statement. Because they're afraid. So I wouldn't go to the extent that persons are not involved in crime because we didn't charge them eventually. I think over time, and it takes a while for communities that have been in fear for a long time before they start to appreciate the difference between when they can move in and out of their communities at their will, as opposed to at the will of armed gunmen. I mean, there's no question that these people exist. And I'm pretty certain that if those people who were doing it before were not the ones that we managed to affect, then we wouldn't have gotten the results that we got. So I'm reasonably comfortable that a number of the persons that we detained were deserving of it. A number of persons went to the tribunal and remained. Some people were released. It really depends on the tribunal and the level of intelligence we can provide. But that separation, that relief is really important, I think.
I have a little puzzle in my mind, Commissioner, about those you said detained for their own protection. That, you know, if persons know that they gave a statement or would give a statement, they are reluctant to speak. No.
No, I didn't say that. No, I'm saying that the person who will give information,
yes,
which will form part of your intelligence as to why you pick up those people there, because the persons in the community may tell you, I have to be careful with how I say this, may tell you that there are this bunch of guys who stay at this corner, stay in this house, these are the problem people. So you pick them up, but even though a lot of what these persons have done in communities have witnesses to what happened, they will not come and actually become a part of the process.
So the witness protection arrangement would not suffice to give them safety,
right,
and
so
out of reach of those persons.
Right. So the challenge is the witness protection program works. The problem with that is that obviously there's limited with the numbers you can possibly put in it, and it's not so much them, but their families and extended families, etc. And we've seen recently, not there, but somewhere else, where 4 people were killed because of a witness issue. Not the witness is fine. You know, so it's something we have to manage carefully. I think the reality that faced us and how we've been prosecuting it largely, given all of our challenges, and we're not denying that there are challenges, but I think we have managed to do significant good work. And I know certainly the members, both of the defense force, but the constabulary force members have really stepped up. And it's important, and I think sometimes they can be a little disheartened when you're actually trying to do the best you can in these circumstances. And as I think I'd mentioned the last time I was here, Chair, the JCF is in that unique position. We see every murder that takes place in this country where it happens. at these scenes of murder that we attend to, and we are unique in that regard, the relatives of people killed are hanging off of us. They're hanging on our members. They're bawling to us. Now, when you have 1,600 of those a year on a relatively small force, it has a certain impact. We have about 180 scenes of the crime persons. Those 180 people see thousands of murders, and that is the frame from which we look at how we prosecute what we do.
I think the issue in a nutshell, though, Commissioner, is that everybody wants a reduction. Everybody wants a community, a space that they can move about safely. That is a universal desire and requirement. Jamaica, no exception. The challenge is, how do you achieve that with the minimal of negative impact on the rest of the society? Because if I get to enjoy my freedom, like those who can afford to have private security, private gated community, and their level of security is secure, it's okay. But when others are affected negatively, for you to get that is a different issue. So in a nutshell, it is really, we want you to do that. We want you to identify the criminals, we want you to lock them up, and we want you to lock them away, right? For as long as the courts, no, I said the courts based on evidence. Yes, so long as what the courts determine. So we are with you, and I say we, those who have expressed the concerns in the process of you doing what you are doing, is what do we have to give up, or what the rest of society has to give up to achieve that goal?
I think within those communities where we've been operating in St. James particularly, for the first time in a long time, they've enjoyed some of that gated type life, where you don't feel so frightened and threatened. And so, but it has come at a cost. As I say, when you start to really look at the figures and break them down about how many people we pick up, most of our operations, we do not pick up anyone. We do not detain anyone. But it's not going to be surprising that the people you do detain fit the same demographic as those people who are committing and are the victims of murder. It would not be, if it was otherwise, it would be strange. And I think where there are challenges, we can continue to work together with people like the public defender. You know, my door is always open to her. She knows we speak. So it is really, I think we have to sometimes just take a little bit of the emotion out of it, because it's not really it's not the best way of looking at the problem.
Well, I won't speak for the public defender because she's here to speak for herself in terms of, go ahead. Sorry you were not here earlier to hear the parameters on which we
No, I was actually, my colleagues had me streaming live, so that's okay. Fine. So I was kept abreast. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Commissioner, the chairman has made, good morning. The chairman made certain statements, and I don't think those statements ought to stand. I disagree with the statements, and I'd like your comments on it. The chairman indicated that based on how the operations were planned, it would seem, I mean, he made the assertions that it would seem as if the members of the JCF, that they planned to have persons sleeping on the floor. Did any of your members, or did you, or the JDF, from an operational perspective, did any one of you plan to have any Jamaican sleeping on any floor, sir? Yes, he did. Yes, he did. See him there, let him say he did not. Did anybody plan to have any Jamaican citizens sleeping on any floor, Mr. Commissioner?
Let me answer that in a way that perhaps I'd prefer to answer. From what I have seen of, and I've been a part of the JSF for 9 months, I've worked with them my whole career, or the JDF. Our basic position is to protect. When we take in people to cauterize something, so we're talking about day 1, day 2, you're talking about 80 plus people coming in and so on. You have a choice, and the choice at that stage is, how many days do you delay as you get a killing every day? And if you know, if you don't affect that community now, you're likely to have some killings there tonight. Do you go or not go? These are the sort of the world that we live in. And my own inclination is to go and save those people's lives. That's what I've spent 35 years doing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
And also, as it relates to the number of persons, could we just confirm how many persons at the beginning of the year? How many persons? The last figures we had were about 77 persons, I believe, were actually in detention in Montego Bay. Could you say what the number was, or was it 50 in Montego Bay?
It was 77 across for all 3 states.
Oh,
it was
77 across all 3?
It was 23, was it? 23 that were there in Montego Bay.
So it was just 23 in Montego Bay and
Yes.
77 across all 3 SOEs.
That's correct.
Okay, as it relates to the average, I saw a report that indicated, if you could confirm, that part of the reason why some persons were in detention beyond 1 day or 2 days, that part of the reason was a difficulty in processing them because they had no ID or they could not readily identify themselves, or their identification needed to be verified, and that is part of the reason why the detention extended beyond, let's say, 1 day or 2 day into this 4 day, awaiting for verification of identification. Could you confirm that from the
Well, yes, there were cases where verification was necessary and required.
All right, thank you, sir.
Chair,
Go ahead,
Commissioner,
Member Green.
there was an interesting part that I came across when I was looking at the report. That it was the first time I was putting my mind towards it. A lot was made, or I don't say a lot was made. A lot was made. It was indicated that persons were detained at a lot of different locations. Some of the locations were places of leisure. The chair made mention of it, football fields, things of that nature. And in so doing, it kind of gives the impression that it may be just arbitrary, that a man is just walking on the road. I saw part of the report where you highlighted where actually murders, robberies, shootings happen. I don't think I zoned in, for the first time, to that reality. Probably you want to speak to that.
Yes, I can speak to that. Not just within the state of emergency, but generally in high violence communities. You have funerals, and funeral related things are high possibilities of further reprisals and shootings. So we know that, so it would not be surprising that you would attend a funeral, and also that's sometimes your only opportunity of getting some of the people who you want to get. Also, church funeral, right. No, I'm saying that this is at funerals, it's a known thing, and because we tend to respond to them, but funerals are one of them. Football matches, we've had a number of people killed at them. I mean, it's not just, we can't only be informed by what happens in St. James. We know these things. These are not unknown. There are certain way in St. James particularly, a number of the persons who are involved in criminal activity have money, much more so than in some of our other inner cities in St. Catherine North and Kingston. And they entertain themselves in various ways. As I say, once you start to look at the intel, then you know why you do the things you do, the challenges, and perhaps, and I think without the benefit of that, things could appear a particular way that are actually not that way. So it's not, we did not go to every pool party. We went to a pool party, or that pool party. We didn't go to all football matches. We went to that one at that time. So that's the point, I think.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I may again. So your operations were strictly based on intelligence?
Then, they were at least based on information.
Right. Okay.
Because we had to crunch that to a process to get intel. Sometimes because the information can expire, you have to move on it immediately. So at least on information.
Thank you.
Yes.
And I think certainly I believe it's important that the nation understands this particular point. The state of emergency and the zones of special operations. The argument got very political, and I hate to see this sort of politicization of crime and of activities that the police and the JDF deem necessary in protecting the nation. And it almost seemed as if there was this argument out there that the state of emergency or the ZOZO was a GLP thing as opposed to a Jamaica thing based on the directive and instructions and advice of the security forces, including the police and the JDF. Could you indicate clearly so that all of Jamaica understands, was the state of emergency a GLP thing, or was the state of emergency
I have to protect
on
the commissioner.
the advice
Member,
the police and the JDF?
Mr. Terry Long, we have to protect the commissioner. I'm going to ask the commissioner not to respond to that. You can't put the commissioner in a position to say what you want to say on a political platform.
Member Daly just indicated something, and I love that he said that. He said the House of Representatives, the Parliament approved it, voted for it, allowed it. Mr. Chairman, what I will ask the commissioner, the government of Jamaica, acting for all Jamaicans, deemed it necessary to implement or to execute SOEs and ZOZOs. Was this done on the advice of the security forces? That's my question.
Yes.
Okay.
In terms of, yes, because that's a process. I mean, I think it's required.
All right. Thank you. So I just wanted to be clear that this was done on the advice of the security forces. And finally, Mr. Commissioner, again, when we spoke of the report from the public defender, a lot of persons spoke about human rights violations and all these things. We've already dealt with the question of the detention period and the 2 to 4 days and reasons for the extended detentions beyond the 2 days in some circumstances. What I wanted from you was, unlike other state of emergencies, do we have, I don't recall, perhaps you could confirm, do we have any reports of police officers or soldiers shooting any Jamaicans? No, could you answer for those who can't?
No, we have no reports of that.
No reports. Do we have any reports of any soldiers or police officers beating up any civilians?
I haven't gotten any reports on that. I saw something, but I have not gotten a report. So
there's no official report?
And I don't think that we've gotten anything from Indicom on that either. But I'm not going to speak by an absolute on that matter. I've hundreds and hundreds of guys out there. Right. But no, nothing has come to my attention.
Right. And finally, do we have any reports of the police or soldiers killing anyone during the whole state of emergency? Now, I just want to know, unlike others.
You need some protection, Commissioner?
No, again, it's either you have the report or you don't.
It's a simple no.
No.
So it's not that there were no police fatal shootings over that period, but it is just not associated with the operation of the state of emergency.
Thank you. And
they're
so,
just normal operations where you end up in conflict.
And so, for all intent and purposes, unlike other state, I mean, we hear of the suppressions of crime and what happened in the 70s, and we know about Tivoli incursion in 2010. Unlike other state of emergencies, this one can safely say has been characterized by the police and the soldiers respecting the basic human rights and integrity and dignity of civilians within the areas in which they were operating.
I think we're getting better at it. It's a work in progress, and we're moving along that path. I don't think, I mean, police officers and military people, they don't leave home to go abuse people. They leave home to go protect people.
Thank you so much, Mr. Commissioner.
I have a follow-up, Chair. I have a follow-up. Something I wanted to ask the Commissioner a little earlier, and I'm sure the JDF can speak to it a little later. I wondered, especially in St. James, we've been there now for some time. Have we seen a bettering of the relationship between the community and the police? I don't think the last time we were here we were able to delve into that, but I believe that is also an important part of the operation. And then I have a question for the Permanent Secretary.
Certainly from the reports I have, but also I actually went to this thing at Montego Hills Police Station. It's the first in a while people had gathered from all over at a police station. So it wasn't that they were in the field over there. They came to the police station, and that's where they felt comfortable to have their celebrations and things. So I think that is a good sign. I think people left feeling good about the police, and that's good. I mean, it's something we need to get broadly in Jamaica. We got to feel good about our police.
I want to suggest we allow Colonel.
Chair, let me just. There was one for the Permanent Secretary. But goes back to the issue of the allocation in relation to the provisions of food for inmates. You said two things, which I probably I would love to delve into. Was there an increase? I think I heard you say that there was an increase in 2017 in your initial report. And if that was the case, could you confirm if that was a 50% increase? And you say we've been at it for a while now in relation to trying to get a better allocation for prisoners. So could you just go back over that? Sorry.
Yes, okay. From from September 2010, prisoner diet provided $200 per day. And then in our constant advocating with the ministry or negotiating with the Ministry of Finance, it actually went up in October 2017 to 300. So we have been at it from that time. So and we've recognized that it was insufficient when we look at the meal plan. But now we've got in professional nutritionists in the constabulary force, and we've had SOEs, and this year in 2018 recognized that 300 was still inadequate. So we've just made a decision, and we've been in the process communicating with finance that we want to go to 500, and we set out the meal plan and what 500 would give the prisoners. So we're working it through, and we've made the costings, and we're in 1920 set it up in our budget, but in the interim we're beginning to make those changes.
Member Daly, and then I'm going to ask Colonel.
Chairman, thank you. Commissioner or PS, let me go specifically to the report that you have submitted and the response to item 19 on page 3. Data indicate that women and persons under age 18 have been perpetrators of crime island-wide and therefore not excluded from St. James for the period January 1, 2016, December 18 to December 18, a total of 210 charges were laid against women in St. James, 1. And 212 charges for various offenses were preferred against persons under 18. In one of the reports you did to us, you listed some of the charges. Could you tell us what are some of the charges in the 210 against the women detained in St. James, and for those youngsters under 18 years of age in St. James, what were some of the charges preferred against them, if you have it?
I think the point here, I don't have it here, but I think the point that was being established was that in the report it said women and children are not excluded from those people detained. Now, that would not be overly surprising if women and children being persons under 18 years of age, are perpetrating crimes, are known to be perpetrators of crimes. And I'm saying that there are examples of this. I don't have the details of each one, but I'm sure I could furnish it if required. I think that was the point that we made. It is not what we have done. What we ensured we did was to separation, so that children are not held with adults, that women are held separately, and that that the men are held in another place. And I think that is the duty of care that we have with respect to our detainees.
Much appreciated, but you have laid, the courts or the police have laid 210 charges against women. And it must be that somebody can say, were they serious charges? Because let me tell you why. In one of the reports you gave us, breaches of the Road Traffic Act was 104, but I saw people detained for malicious destruction of property 1, assault on common law 3, loitering 1, carnal abuse 1. The police was very detailed in listing some of the offenses they prosecuted people for. Women must jump out at us, and if you have it now or in the future, can you supply? I would certainly, as a member of this committee, would like to know what are some of the charges were laid against the women, the 210 charges laid against the women in St. James.
Member, so okay, we can. So we can provide that. I'll provide that, and you can even be broader than that. Just it is really, you always have to be careful around gender-related things, and I think I think the point here is just the way. I just want to make it clear that the way it's portrayed, as if as part of this overall picking up people, women and children, it has a certain language, voice to it. I just want to make it clear that where they are found to be in breach, or intelligence says that they also naturally would be picked up. We had a 15-year-old kill somebody right outside the Rio. They shot him dead and walked back. One of the women who was detained was reviewed by the tribunal and retained in detention. This is, I mean,
no, I think it just be instructive. Yeah. Not to say that young persons or female are not involved in criminal activity at all. Yeah.
Just before you close with and move on, I'd like to ask the Commissioner, the situation which obtains in Montego Bay, St. James, and more specifically Montego Bay, wherein you are unable to capture the evidence to prosecute a number of the persons who you have established are violence producers. Would you say that situation is not a situation which obtains in a democratic society, normal democratic society?
So and perhaps this is that you raised that is probably a good thing, because almost anywhere you go, you'll have the police will know of persons who are criminals and will not be able to prosecute them. That's everywhere. That's not unique to us. But
Well,
yes,
may I ask you to say
right.
then, what is it that makes our situation?
Sheer numbers of people being killed strains every possible system that we have and makes us inefficient. Over the period, and I'll give you an example, our clear-up rate for homicides, for murders in 2017 was 28%. In 2018, it was 57%. So as you start to suppress the numbers, obviously there's just a ratio thing, but the fact is the cases get better. The investigator who has every day a new file cannot function properly because he keeps getting new work. That is why it's critical to get the numbers down. The other thing is that, of course, each time you have one, you can look for 2 reprisals. So it feeds on itself. The violence continues to feed, and you have to suppress it. Now, obviously, the thing about violence, it doesn't really matter who does it. It tends to increase. And so I think we've been very circumspect in reducing the amount of violence, even though we have high force levels. So if you see, this is really how violence operates differently from crime.
In December, when you made the request, and I take it that you made such a request.
No, I was in March. I came to the constabulary.
Well, may I say, when in December, when you, or thereabouts, when
the request was
Jamaica
made.
Constabulary requested an extension of the emergency provisions, did you advance that argument as the basis for continuing the
Well,
extension?
I mean, I think I've probably tried to use every argument I possibly have, including that, in terms of we need to just get those numbers down. And I was giving a little, we were in a discussion a little earlier, and I just want to, perhaps I could frame it in a particular way from our perspective. So, as we say, this year was what we could consider a good year. I mean, it's not good, but it's good, if you know what I mean. Coming down from 1,600 to 1,200 but 1,200 is not good. Because what 1,200 means to me, I was trying to frame it in a way that perhaps people can understand and understand what we see. If we take one image from each scene of a murder, put it on a slide in a PowerPoint presentation, and run the slide 1 second per transition, the slideshow will run for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of 1 second faces of people who are killed in a good year. That's my perspective on things, and that's the argument I make. Okay, so.
Colonel?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members all. Mr. Chair, I think the Commissioner of Police and the PS who spoke before him in their opening statements and, of course, their responses to questions would have covered some of the main issues arising from the report, the main reason for why we're here. I think they spoke particularly to the concerns raised about arbitrariness, discriminatory operational procedures, and the general treatment of detainees. So the only thing I think that is really left for me to add for completeness is just for the benefit of all to sort of clarify a little bit about how we support the police and some of the benefits gained from our ability to do so in certain circumstances, certainly the circumstances of the Emergency Powers Act. Clearly, when we are operating under those circumstances, as alluded to before, we have a little bit more flexibility to enhance our contribution in this intimate support that we provide to the police in these circumstances. What I want to point out, though, in the matter in relation to detentions in particular, is that notwithstanding the fact that we have, under the Emergency Powers Act, the powers to detain persons and to seize items, etc., we do subscribe as a best practice to the principle of police primacy. And specifically in respect to detentions, we ensure that as soon as we have to detain anyone, there are procedures in place to hand them over to the police at the earliest opportunity. And I think that is worth clarifying in the context of some of the assertions made in the report for our benefit. That's what I'd like to add at this point, and I'm available for any questions.
Colonel, you mentioned about, use your word, more flexibility in giving support to the JCF under the state of emergency. How less flexible will you be outside of a state of emergency?
Thank you for the question. So obviously, because we don't have the additional authority powers without the state of emergency, we essentially have the same sort of abilities that the ordinary citizen would have, fundamentally in those circumstances. And the quality of our contribution is essentially reduced to supporting the police in a more limited way than we could have if we had more authorities given to us.
Isn't it a fact that the soldier, by just being who you are as soldiers, you have a automatic shock and awe effect on every ordinary person, including myself, and any community, just by your mere presence? Isn't that a norm in the jails with soldiers and their presence? And I ask it in the context of you giving support to a policeman who might be seen as provide less shock and less awe.
I'm not sure to what extent that holds true, particularly in our history, more recent history as well. What I would say is that when we go out there to assist the police routinely, the citizens effectively respond to us in a way similar to how they respond to the police. I mean, fundamentally.
Fundamentally?
Fundamentally.
They respond the same way?
Fundamentally. They see law enforcement and they respond in that way. The difference usually is in the context of what we're talking about in respect to the additional powers that could be had under a state of emergency, is that we will be able now to independently take some actions and do some more things that we would not ordinarily be able to do by ourselves.
But from your experience, being out there for any extended, you said, I emphasize the question about they respond to you the same way. People are not accustomed to seeing police around them every day. soldiers around them every day in many communities. You are itinerant presence.
Recall, Chairman, that we have been assisting the police from all this time
in joint operations.
Right.
But in terms of presence in communities?
Well, we're referring to the communities that we're in. And so in those particular communities where we assist the police on a regular basis, that is what I was alluding to when I gave my response about how people normally respond.
One last question in that regard on my part. There is the argument that your perpetual presence in any one area reduces the shock and awe effect of your presence in those communities. Any comments on that? For an extended, continuous period of time. In other words, you become like the police.
What I would say to that is that our people are far more sophisticated nowadays than they were, say, in the 1960s and 70s. And they understand what we can and cannot do, and quite rightly so. And so I believe a lot of the impact we're able to have, and certainly as evidenced by what we're seeing with the level of reductions under the states of public emergencies, is really rooted in what they know is possible. So if they know that the average soldier, even by himself, can pursue a particular course of action, then that has a deterrent effect, other than when they know that doesn't obtain. And as soon as those circumstances change, we see a change in behavior by the criminal elements. And the population in general, they recognize the differences and they act accordingly.
I believe Member Green had the floor.
Member Green, Member Daly.
Yeah. Colonel, one of the things that I noticed during the state of emergency, when I went into the areas, I saw a number of checkpoints being manned solely by soldiers. Is that something that outside of a state of emergency can happen? Can the soldiers set up a checkpoint and man it without police?
Okay, so what I'd say again is that our best practice, as far as practicable, is to always have at least one policeman with us for obvious reasons. But yes, obviously, as I alluded to before, when there are enhanced authorities, given to us by Parliament, we're able to do some things independent of the police, to include what you just mentioned.
Yes, Colonel, there has been, and without divulging much, security operations in Clarendon from mid-November or before. And there's no state of emergency with soldiers and police. Somebody reported that during the Christmas holidays, sections of Westmoreland that were under fire from criminal elements, soldiers were seen patrolling, driving through, and kept the peace. Are you saying that you cannot operate in maintaining law and order and reduce criminal activities without a state of emergency being declared?
Thank you for that question, Member. Absolutely not. I think what I am saying is that, and as borne out by the facts, is that we are quite prepared to do all we can do with whatever authorities we have to do it, whatever tools we have available to us. And historically, we have been doing that. In the case of Clarendon, I'm not aware of a recommendation being made at this point for SOE in that space. But it does not negate the fact that where we believe such a measure could enhance the results, the outcomes, that is our professional responsibility so to recommend and to have that tool available to us for as long as it is practicable to do so.
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment/question because Colonel, what I keep getting from some fractions, some sectors in society, is that there's this argument that is trying to be pushed that the situation that prevails in Jamaica with a murder rate of approximately 60 per 1,000, that there is somehow some sort of normalcy to that which does not require extreme police measures. There is this sort of, there is this argument, and the basis of the argument would seem to suggest that, yeah man, everything in Jamaica, everything airy, yeah man, 60 per 1,000, that normal man, our thing that. The rest of the world is saying, no, we're at 6, try and get to 6. And then when the parliament did not have the numbers to vote for the SOE to continue, there were some people in Jamaica who were now pushing this argument, and it would have seemed that the base of the argument was that, all right, the police and soldiers then make a little inroad, and it now reached 49. 49 good again. So there is no need for extreme policing. There is no need for a state of emergency. There is no need to give the police extended powers or extreme powers. So I would like from you, Colonel, to indicate, do you think that there is a degree of normalcy, or that the numbers that persist in Jamaica now are so normal that the police and the soldiers no longer require any sort of emergency powers because we have somehow attained this level of normal that we should all be comfortable knowing that, yeah man, with the 49, we're going to reach 60 no more. So what if we never get to 6? So what if we don't get to 20? So regular policing, normal policing, everything works now.
Colonel?
Yes.
And the Commissioner could also chime in if he so pleases.
Sorry, say again?
I'm saying, and the Commissioner could also add.
Okay.
If you wish.
Yeah, I think I'll respond by saying that the recommendations from the Commissioner of Police and the substantive Chief of Defence staff in respect to inappropriate forum, in respect to what they, where they believe the enhanced measures could help, are a matter of record, and I don't think we, at this point, are changing that.
Thank you, Colonel. Commissioner, I have a question. Now you said it is 23 detainees currently in St. James. Yeah, plus or minus. Yeah. When you closed in St. Catherine, how many detainees were on the 2nd of January?
What we did is, on the days coming up, we were releasing persons bit by bit. The persons we felt were the worst, we kept till the last. Because it was going to fall, I think it was on the 2nd that St. Catherine ended, and so before we started to release people. So there were, if I'm not mistaken, around 30 from the St. Catherine North. 30? 30.
Okay, in St. Catherine.
St. Catherine North.
Sorry.
Don't hold me to that, but it's close to that.
I missed the question, sorry. I don't want to have it wrong in my mind. Okay. Are you saying there are 30 people who were released largely because of the end of the state of emergency in St. Catherine North?
No.
Yes.
In St. Catherine, yeah, I was coming to that. The tribunal never functioned in St. Catherine up to now, because it is going before the tribunal that a detainee would get the opportunity to be released or to be kept. In the case of St. James, you said for those who went before the tribunal, 10, the tribunal ruled that 10 should remain. Right? For those that went to the tribunal. 22. Yes. There were 24 detention orders.
So the scheme is that there's an objection and then they go to the tribunal.
They can't get to the tribunal unless the detention orders are issued.
Right.
Because one of the complaints that I gathered is that for many of them, the detention orders were not signed by the minister, which would give, that's what the lawyer said.
And so we released the persons. If we didn't get the detention order, we'd have to release them.
Yes, but many of them, I understand, they wanted to get the detention order signed so that they could get before the tribunal, and that was one of the complaints.
But they would have been released if we...
No.
Wait, hold on. Yeah. I think, if you don't mind, Chair, I mean, Mr. Powell is very intimate with that detail, if he can speak.
And I'll invite, after I'm through here, I'm going to ask the public defender to make any comments in light of what responses were given, that if she so wish. ACP.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, the 11 persons remained in custody at the wish of the tribunal. The tribunal ordered that they remain in custody. If an objection was not made and they were not taken to the tribunal, they would have to be released.
Sorry, repeat that last one. Repeat that last.
If they were in custody for an extended period and for 3 months and the detention order was not issued, we'd have to release them. Some were released some were released by the court.
He said would have. Do you have many cases of persons who were there for more than 3 months for which detention orders were not issued, signed?
There were a few persons like that.
Few like about how much? 10, 20?
Less than 10, far less than 10. I think that there are 4 persons.
And so the minimum, once you are detained, the minimum is 3 months before you are qualified to go before a tribunal.
No. No, some persons were taken to court. You could be taken to court, the court could intervene and you would be released.
How did they have gotten to court? Because I understand that...
And habeas corpus. The lawyers would take them to court on habeas corpus. Well, the judge would intervene.
I'm not going to press it, but if my recollection is correct... if my recollection is correct, and I stand to be corrected, the public defender is a lawyer by profession, is that under the state of emergency, we have other lawyers, the habeas corpus is it suspended? In other words, you can't take somebody who is in detention.
No, sir.
And carry them before the court?
No.
So, no, the reason why I'm a little bit not so clear on that, because cases, anyone who is in detention, say you're there for 3 weeks for argument's sake, can you be taken before the court?
At any time, Chairman, you are entitled to go before the court by way of habeas corpus.
So a lawyer can go to the court?
A lawyer can take your matter to court, asking for the police to show cause as to why you should be kept or why you should be released at any time.
Okay. Just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
There was a chair.
No, one second. Mr. Powell, ACP.
ACP, yes.
I
Back to ACP.
interjected then. I don't know if you were complete in...
Well, I had answered the question that was asked.
just for clarity.
That's right.
ACP, you said 11 persons still remain in custody as a result of the detention order signed. They appeared before the tribunal, and the tribunal says these are dangerous men and women, so keep them still. Are you saying that?
I'm sorry about 11, it's 14 persons. 14 persons remain in custody.
Yes.
At the behest of the tribunal.
Do you have any women and under 18 in that category of 14, in that group?
There's no under 18, there's no woman.
Okay.
There's one woman, but she was subsequently released.
No, it was a restriction. She was released with restriction.
Right. She was released with some restrictions. So she's not in police custody.
Okay.
But there are restrictions that were given by the minister.
And I just want to make sure the 14 remain in custody.
14 remain in custody as at today.
As at.
Come back to St. Catherine, Commissioner, and also Kingston and St. Andrew. When you closed last night, you finished in Kingston last night, right? So you wouldn't have any. None of them would have gone before a tribunal. Right? So you released them on process, okay? In the same way that the one woman that ACP mentioned of that was released on condition, as any of the 30 released from St. Catherine or the corporate era released on condition?
I can't, I don't know.
But in other words, what I'm trying to deduce from the answer is that if the person is of interest, security interest, you release them on condition in order to...
No, we wouldn't have set the conditions. Those conditions would have been set by either a court or tribunal.
But the court is setting the action based upon what you would have presented?
Right. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in the case of St. Catherine, if there were any who are of interest, you would have done similarly?
Or attempted to get them. Yes. Yeah.
No, didn't.
Remember, Mr. Chair, the tribunal didn't meet.
In St. Catherine.
So those
would have had to be
conditions that would have been any restricted conditions of release would have come from the tribunal, but there was no meeting there.
But
yeah.
So if you have a state of emergency in Kingston and St. Catherine now, the tribunal by law ought to have been established.
It was.
The tribunal was not established.
It was established.
What did not meet? The tribunal was established, but not, thank you very much, but did not meet. And you have 34, based on intelligence, dangerous persons that you have detained. How could you just have released them like that because the state of emergency ends?
The tribunal has no authority outside of the state of emergency.
No,
take them, go to court.
That's what where I was coming
to be detained. Or
No, they
did
can't
their
detain
lawyers
them.
appear?
But
Hold on.
I think you made a point earlier, Commissioner, and I don't know if maybe it needs restated. There's a difference between information and intelligence and evidence. Now, and what I gather is that in the state of emergency, there is an ability to act upon information and intelligence. And that action, I would expect, is done with a view to obtain the necessary evidence.
If possible.
So the point that, remember, Dali, how it is framed, maybe you would want to speak to it, because the suggestion, my understanding is that you would have now had to release those 30 people because there would not be, at this point, the evidence upon which to hold them. But if you had a state of emergency, they could have still been held. That is my understanding. And you can clarify.
That's my understanding too. Yeah, but I just further to remember Dali's question. The question I have, sir, yeah, is that when you would have picked up those 30 persons, it would have been on the basis of information and intelligence, but maybe not evidence. And so you would have kept them in detention for as long as you had them to build evidence. So these are persons that you would have picked up, you know who they are, you would have gotten information, identification, etc., etc. You know who they are, you know where they're from. So as far as that 30 is concerned, the world doesn't come to an end because you're going to be following them, or have been following them subsequent to their release with the end of state of emergency.
To the extent that you will pursue cases against them, it really depends on our ability to get evidence on those particular people. A lot of the things that are attributable to some of them, all the witnesses are dead. So we'll have to see if we can use forensics or some other means of tying them to it. Obviously in St. Catherine North, some of the key violence managers, the people who are really who cause a lot of the violence, we actually have in custody outside of a state of emergency because cases are being built around them. And I mean, that is one of the things, that's one of the benefits of the state of emergency. The thing is that St. James in particular is particularly difficult in terms of crossing that, just because of the way, probably the length of time at which they've been subjected to that sort of high level of violence and fear. They're really afraid in St. James, more so than other places.
Commissioner, earlier on, so you have those who were detained and now they are released with the end of the state of emergency, but you have information on them, you know who they are, and so normal policing using intelligence, etc., comes into play or remains in play.
The thing is that, yes, normal policing remains in play. The problem is that those people can go into the community and continue to reside beside the people who they may think may have said something.
Is that normally happen everywhere, criminals, when they are not? Does that the normal case everywhere where criminals are not locked up?
Yes, that is normal, but that is what's created a huge murder rate. That's how they've been able to kill.
Is it then to deduce the only way to deal with such persons are with a state of emergency?
No, and the point is, I think
the cause of the reduction.
No, the chair. The point is that there is a volume of murders that you will have that your systems will not be able to process. From an investigative perspective, from a justice perspective, the chain, when you have upwards of 1,000 murders, it's too much for that system to process in a year.
But if you look at some historical data, where you had higher than, you came down in which year? I have it at my fingertip, to 1,005, when it was prior to then higher than what it is now. And it came down without a state of emergency.
No, it didn't. It came out down right at the back end of a state of emergency and tumbled 40% as soon as the state of emergency over a period. Also, St. James did not benefit from that. The figures we have now in St. James, the last time they were seen was in 2003. We've rewound it 15 years. That is where we're at now. 15 years.
What I'm trying to get at, Commissioner, is that the correlation you're making between the reduction and the state of emergency
is unquestioned.
Is that in order to have the reduction, you need this indispensable tool of state of emergency.
Whilst we're still up at a certain amount, a certain capacity, a certain number of homicides and of murders, you do need it, because really, I mean, you use normal measures for normal circumstances. And I say, I'm not, and here's, I want to be careful to keep myself into what is my best assessment of things. If I'm at 9 times the global average, at 3 times the average of the most murderous region in the world, other people haven't addressed this thing through any normal measures. It's just not, it can't, you're just capacity, sheer capacity. You're not, nobody's going to design a system to match that level. That's the cost, the sheer cost and size of a system. If you think about it, right now we're clearing up over 600 murders a year. If we're clearing up and pushing into the justice system, into the courts, 1,200 to 1,600 murders a year, and those cases, they will not be processed. They cannot.
That would suggest, should I deduce from that then,
right,
that one of the corresponding requirements to deal with that situation is for movements to be made on the justice system in terms of court facilities to handle those,
right, but
that I number that you're referring to.
No, but Chair, well, what I'm saying is that what we need to do is push the numbers down, so that yes, there is some work to be done in that regard, but you cannot, in my mind, design a system that is designed to take 1,600 murders.
No.
So we have to push it down.
No, agree. No, yeah. My suggestion about the court, not that it will be a permanent arrangement,
okay,
but if you have an unusual
temporary
situation, an interim facility to deal with.
Right, and so Chair, what I'm saying is whether it's a court method or whatever method, I mean nationally, we need other than normal measures, whether it is not only policing powers, but across the board, we have to collectively, I think, apply our minds to the situation of how we get out of it. Normal measures hasn't helped.
I want to take you up on that. Go back, Commissioner, to the point made by Colonel Williams about that flexibility to support you.
Yes.
And the powers that you have.
Right.
The ZOZO legislation, yes, gives you more than normal police powers than what obtained.
Right.
But it does not provide for the kinds of detention that you have under state of emergency.
Yes.
Right? But you have more room, more flexibility.
Yes.
Can the state of emergency in those spaces, where you have had state of emergency and areas where the ingredients would have been there to justify a state of emergency, can't the ZOZO powers augment the normal policing powers to provide the additional flexibility that the Colonel mentioned of, to give you the assistance? No, there are two, no. The ZOZO, no, Mr. Commissioner, my understanding is ZOZO has 2 elements. It has a security component and it has a social intervention component.
Yes.
The social intervention component will vary across the different communities that they are on. For example, a rural community don't have the same profile as an urban community, and as such the level or type of social intervention will vary. So given your concern from a security standpoint, and respectfully, The social part is not your responsibility. That's other parts of the government, right? Your primary role as security person is to deal with the security element. That's the reason why in the ZOZO, the government invites other agencies like, what Mr. Man there? JSIF, to come in and provide those. You focus on the security element of it. From where you are, where you need extra flexibility, to use Colonel's term, can't the ZOZO legislation, the ZOZO powers, give you that augmented, that enhanced support, flexibility to achieve what you want in those spaces? And I'm thinking of even Spanish Town.
Yes, so it's the zones of special operations legislation is largely designed to take a specific community from both high crime and violence, but also a lot of social deficit, to a situation where that community can operate normally with normal structures and leadership and so on and so forth. A number of the places, I mean, if you look at somewhere like Spanish Town has formal leadership structures that run the thing. You have a parish council, you have all of that. It doesn't lend itself to a zone. There may be a little community within Spanish Town that may lend itself to that. And that's really what the legislation is designed for in the scheme of it.
But what I'm saying, how does that differ from the KCC?
No. I'm saying that one of the features of under a zone of special operations is that you're creating space, you're securing a community that was largely under the control of some criminal organization or gang, and separating them, getting the gang out of the community. That's the clear. Then you hold it to ensure that they don't come back, and you start to build both the physical structures and infrastructure and also the social capital within that community, and it's a really community transformation legislation. But it's recognized that in order to get that transformation, you have to have security, and the gang cannot control that transformation. That's really the scheme of that legislation. Whether we can devise a scheme of enhanced measures that are somewhere in between normal and the state of emergency is something that I think should be looked at, because beyond, we're talking about situations that we see coming now. There are situations that can arise on us where we require enhanced measures, but you don't necessarily want to declare a state of emergency. So there's room for those sort of things.
And that is encouraging.
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe yes.
No, please. We have a time issue before us. It's now 1 o'clock. I want to crave your indulgence to give the public defender an opportunity to make any comments that she wished to make now.
Well, except, Mr. Chairman, that I do believe that Member Green had a question for the Commissioner or a comment, and,
yes.
and so did I,
I'm aware
Mr.
of
Chairman.
that. That's why I'm looking in Member Green's eye while I make this recommendation.
You know, Chair, boy, you know what I find? I understand Chairman's privilege, but when you spend so much of the time asking the questions by yourself and then call upon the time, when you look in my eyes, it really doesn't help, right? Honestly. I know, but seriously, the chair should allow the members of the committee just time.
I glanced across to see if there was any intimation, and I saw none, and I proceeded.
You didn't look into my...
Chair, I won't be long. I think the Commissioner has dealt with the issue regarding Zozo and the fact that the scheme that was envisioned in Zozo as outlined in the Act really speaks to a limited area of operation. And the fact that a cordon could only be for 24 hours, a curfew could only be for 72 hours, and then you would have to renew it. It is something, and I mention this because you raised the issue. And I think once you look at the Act, Chairman, you would recognize that it is not a substitute. And the argument that is put forward that the Zozo can somehow be substituted for the state of emergency, I'm hoping after this committee meeting is something that is never repeated, because it cannot be a substitute based on the scheme of the Act. I won't ask a question since time is upon us.
And Mr. Chairman, I too would wish to make a statement. And
no, member Terry Long.
You don't.
We have a time. I asked the membership. We have a time constraint, and we want to accommodate the
and
public
I still
defender.
wish. And Mr. Chairman, I listened to you for 22 minutes, Mr. Chairman. Allow me 1 minute to say something to the Commissioner. On what basis?
Because you're out of order.
On what basis?
By your conduct.
Really?
Yes.
22 minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Members, with your permission, I want to invite the public defender to make an intervention.
I would
out of courtesy to our invitation that we have extended.
I believe there are 7 members here, Mr. Chairman. I do not believe any member has a difficulty with me speaking to the Commissioner for 1 minute, unlike the 22 minutes that you took. I don't think any of the 7 members here have a difficulty with that. The time we are spending here bandying words, I could have made my comment already. Thank you, sir. I will continue. Mr. Commissioner, and this is what I think Jamaica needs to understand. I thank you for the clarity with which you spoke. And I myself did not recognize that the last time we saw these figures in Montego Bay was in 2003. And I think that is very, very important for the country to realize. Because when we speak of, I hear persons talking about, oh, there is no crime plan, and where's the crime plan, and we're not meeting, or we're not doing this, and the country cannot move forward because there is no crime plan. What the country really must sit down and realize is that, as you have stated, Jamaica's crime rate is 9 times the global average, and 3 times the average of some of the most murderous regions in the world. And the only way in the last 15 years, and this is across administrations, so it's not a political thing, this is a Jamaican thing, the only evidence of a crime measure taking place in Jamaica that yielded any great result over the last 15 years in the parish of Montego Bay is the state of emergency. And I loathe us all to consider, come January 31st, what next will we do? Do we then come back before the Parliament on the recommendation of the security forces, obviously, and seek to have a new state of emergency in Montego Bay? Because certainly it has taken 15 years to get to these 2003 numbers. And I think it is commendable to you and your team for having done an excellent job in Jamaica. Thank you.
Madam Public Defender.
Thank you, Chairman. In responding, I first of all want to thank Commissioner and JDF for, and Madam Permanent Secretary for the contributions that they have made this morning. In particular, Chairman, we are exceedingly pleased to see the, I don't know if I can put it as high as a commitment to the improvement of police stations across the island. Because I certainly think, Chairman, if I may be bold as to suggest that our report is certainly a foundation for us to look at the conditions, not only as to how we keep persons, but also police officers who work at the station with a view to improving conditions across the island. I also want to say, Chairman, that we are exceedingly pleased to note the acceptance of the need to improve plumbing system at the Freeport police station in particular, an improvement of ventilation. In respect of the diet, I think that, Chairman, we are more than exceedingly pleased in respect of that, based on actually what we had seen in Montego Bay. But just as a matter of clarity, and I don't know, Pierce, if I heard you incorrectly, that the last increase was in April 2015 based on Force Order 3544. That's what we had investigated. Based actually on another investigation we're doing in relation to another police station lockup. So it's 2015. So the intention, PS, is to increase that to $500 per day for the provision of 3 meals per person, with upon the advice and recommendation also of dietitians and persons with that kind of specialized knowledge. So, Chairman, we want to record our appreciation for taking those matters on board. In terms of Commissioner's response as to some of the issues raised operationally and out in the field and the theater of operation, Chairman, we would not be able to make definitive comments on any particular situation, as we do not have that expertise. What we would wish to reiterate is that regardless of what information exists, the police and soldiers can only act pursuant to the regulations. And we would have made submissions on our concern as to whether or not those regulations were being strictly adhered to. And I think those submissions, Chairman, when it comes to the liberty of any citizen, then the law, the regulations as provided for by Parliament must be strictly adhered to. Chairman, it is noteworthy that the regulations actually provide different types of remand. For instance, Regulation 22 is a regulation that allows an authorized officer to prohibit persons from going into other areas, to prohibit persons from living at a particular location or from entering an area. Regulation 32 also authorizes an authorized officer to order or require someone to stay home or to stay at a particular geographic location. No, the regulations under the Emergency Powers Act, the proclamation, rule and regulations. And Regulation 33, Chairman, is the regulation that allows the minister to exercise control. So, for instance, if there's information or intelligence that leads the security forces to believe that there are a particular group of persons who are committing acts of wrong or threaten the safety and peacefulness of a community. The detention order is what is used to control the movement of those persons. The point I make, Chair, is that we would still have concerns about the numbers of persons who came into custody as against the outcome for a much lesser sum or number of persons being charged. So we still have that concern. Commissioner has explained to some extent how that came about, but what we would say as the public defender is that we would like to see, not only in a state of emergency, but in ordinary policing too, the strictest adherence to the law, because it is that which protects rights. And I don't think that the Commissioner and I are at odds at that. Let me just check, Chairman, if my team would want me to add anything further. In respect of St. Catherine North, Chair, the committee was properly formed. That is Emergency Powers Review Tribunal Committee, and formed very quickly after the declaration of the state of emergency, but it just never, there was no detention order. Well, the committee never sat, none as far as we know. No objections were heard by the Emergency Power Review Tribunal as to the reasons or lack thereof. Chairman, we are heartened by the acceptance of some of the recommendations. There are others there that we feel that I hope there is an opportunity for our office to have further discussions for the improvement of conditions in the in our places of custody, and I don't think anybody can really protest too much. And also in relation to the conditions that are also applicable to police officers at those facilities. So, Chairman, that is all that we would want to add to these proceedings.
Thank you very much, Madam Public Defender. I think the Commissioner welcome your advocacy for the condition of the police officers, if not anybody else. I said, if not, I didn't want to exclude, but given that the Commissioner, right, as primary or first responsibility to the men he leads, I know he would welcome. I know doubt the detainees, as you mentioned, to Commissioner. Commissioner Pierce, Colonel, Public Defender, and your respective support team, really want to thank you for the open and frank discussion here. Personally speaking, even though the states of emergencies, well, some have come to an end and another to come to an end the end of this month, the usefulness of this exercise is to inform and guide how we conduct ourselves as a country in such situation should the circumstance arise that another state of emergency has to be declared. And it's for that reason why it is important for us to be very, very serious about these experiences, such as, for example, the whole issue of the detention orders and the tribunals, how they work or did not work, and what are the consequences of it, so that we don't repeat those failures in the past. Yes, and there is, we said it in the last meeting, the need to assess the impact of states of emergency beyond just the reduction in the numbers. Because when we had the meeting the first time with the presentation from the business community here and the informal discussions out there, the whole economic impact, the social impact in those communities, it is like in war situation, you know more than anyone else, Colonel and Major, the whole effect on persons who go and fight war after. So you might win the war, but you have another whole other set of problems from having been in the war to begin with that can be of enormous magnitude. So there's a lot for us to learn from the experience so that as a country we can be better off going forward, even if we don't have another state of emergency again. And I hope the crime rate continue downward, and I am confident that the men and women you lead in the security forces will continue to do their very best. I know it was very telling on the members of the force for the hours that they spend, and all other challenges. We really, as a country, need to thank them for the sacrifices that they have made to bring us to where we are now. Members, yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Being that I am directly involved, being a part of St. James, let me publicly take time out to single out the JDF, Commissioner of the JCF, Madam McIntosh, Permanent Secretary, on the extraordinary and wonderful work that your entire entity combined has done for St. James on a whole. The friendly city and the productivity of St. James Montego Bay is like a seed that has been covered under the cloud of violence. You have removed it somewhat, and we are now seeing the sprouting of that seed back to where it was. Christmas this year was overjoyous for us. People were out in numbers. I can name communities such as Crawford Street. When we announced the ZOSO, that name stood out more than anything else as one of the areas. Today, if you visit or drive through the community of Mount Salem, which Crawford Street is a part of, you'll see the many youngsters prolificing at the entrance of the roadway. Mr. Chairman, before ZOSO and the SOE, bottom Crawford Street could not walk up to top Crawford Street and vice versa. Today, the boys, the youngsters, they are having time together. And this is something, it gets emotional for us, Mr. Chairman, because we know what it is to be driving by and see bodies lying at the roadside. Madam Permanent Secretary, what has been done in Salt Spring, Montego Hills, is wonderful news. For 20 years, we have not had, or more, we have not had a coming together of members of the community. The church service numbers have been dwindling because of the violence. Today, just 4 days ago, I was in the community of Salt Spring doing my regular rounds, and one lady said to me, MP, when the police tell we say at time for lock up a shop, we don't have no qualms about it, because when the gunman them used to tell we for lock, we couldn't even backtalk them. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, madam. We do appreciate it.
Yes. Once again, thank you very much. And PS, just before I close, while I have you here, the used car arrangement that should have been tabled from last year, right? The mediation report, settlement with the used car suppliers and the government, we heard that have been concluded and nothing has come here. So I want to ask you, in your capacity, if you could advise the clerk what is the status of that.
You wish me to answer that? No, we will. No,
No,
okay.
yes,
Okay.
this particular meeting has been concluded. That can be communicated through the clerk of the house. There's no need to respond, PS.
We know times are hard, but can selling your vote really make a difference in your life? How many of them even remember you and your community? What you need is opportunity for yourself